Avi Meyers here, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine. Welcome. And, of course, I want to say thanks to my entire technical crew, Sonny Hersh, who actually is the personal savior of Rabbi Hertz, Rabbi Moskowitz. No, just kidding. But he is their hero. He did a lot of good stuff. And anyway, always does a lot of good stuff. Also the chairman of the District Advisor Committee. But more importantly, less importantly, whatever, we are privileged to have the leading election lawyer in the state of Illinois. For those of you who missed it, and you shouldn't have missed it, and stay tuned in October. We'll do this again, the live pre-election show on a Sunday morning at Chicago Access. The leading election lawyer in the state of Illinois, a man who's represented Al Gore, John Edwards, and all kinds of other interesting people, Jim Nally. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Avi, and thanks for having me on.
First of all, a pleasure to have you. And, this is the first time we're doing a show after the election. Yeah. And what an interesting election on so many grounds. And, all the late, they didn't even get the totals the same day, the next day, the day after. I mean, it took several days to get the totals together.
I'm telling people Election Day was Election Week this year because by the time the ballots were counted, all the ballots, it was literally a week later.
It was unbelievable, and you were involved in that. As a matter of fact, you and I were both at the victory party for my personally favorite candidate, Terry O'Brien.
That's right.
And now I had a ride, so my ride left, and I'm told you had to leave a little later that day because you actually got a phone call saying you got to start counting votes for us.
Yeah, I got a call that evening to come downtown, and at that point, nobody even knew what the problems were. They just knew that there were no totals coming in, and usually by 9 o'clock on election night, 90% of the precincts have reported, and by 10:30, 11 o'clock, there was still maybe 25, 30% were in. So everybody knew there was a problem, but they didn't know what the problem was. So I was down there that evening into the next morning till about 4 o'clock in the morning, just trying to sort out with the election authorities, where are the votes and why aren't we getting the numbers on this stuff?
So actually, you were a lot closer to the source than I was. Where were the votes? Why weren't you getting the numbers on this stuff?
Well, as everybody knows, we switched over from the punch cards.
Right.
And supposedly to a quote, better system.
Okay.
Well, it didn't quite turn out that way. And the problem, I think, there obviously Commissioner Suffredin's already had some hearings on this issue, and the city council I know is going to be having hearings, the state legislature. But what I have seen and in talking to people over the last month or so, the real problem is that they didn't switch over from one system to another. They switched over from one system to two new systems. Because if you recall, they had the optical scan ballots where you marked a paper ballot in the oval.
Right.
And there were also touchscreen ballots where you...
Yeah, see, I did the oval thing. Now I wanted to ask you, just so... Now, I really, like I was doing the Iowa test when I was a kid, I really filled in the whole circle. Did I have to do that, or just an X would have been fine?
An X would have been fine. I did the same thing as you, because I didn't want to make
I was so worried about, past things. But you're right, the optical, the touch screen is a whole different thing. So, and, it's funny, because I'm a big believer in saving newspapers and reading them later.
Yeah.
Because you don't ever get today's news today. You get to figure it out in perspective later. And I was reading one of the stories where... what's his name? David Orr from 49, who, another politician. Anyway, he said, it's like, it really would have been nice if we would have had a run-through on a smaller election before the big primary election.
Well, one of the things you look at, that you look at in hindsight, obviously, is 2020, but maybe it would have been a better idea rather than going straight from the punch cards to OptiScan and touchscreen. Maybe do touchscreens in 10% of the precincts, do OptiScan in another 10%, and see what happens and see what these problems could be.
See, my basic feeling was when I was reading, I think we're going to withhold the check from these guys and see how they're doing. My basic feeling was, okay, I think these people were improperly trained, and the fault probably is at a county level. And now, who knows? But the fact is that I figure, typical political stuff, passing off the blame to somebody else.
Well, you know what? I think the problem was the technology. There were definitely technological failures where machines just broke down.
That's why we're talking to you, because you were actually there and you can tell us.
Yeah. The machines, there were a good number of machines, far more than there should have been percentage-wise, that just didn't function properly.
Now, how many, what are there, about 3,500 precincts in Chicago, something like that?
Chicago's about 2,600, and then Cook County is about 2,300.
So about 5,000 precincts together.
Throughout Cook County, right.
Okay. So, and you're talking about, 4,900 precincts each had two new voting machines.
Right. There was one touch screen in Chicago. Actually, they were sharing them. Usually, it was one touch screen for every 2 precincts, but everybody had the OptiScan counter with the paper ballots.
Okay.
And I think part of the problem was we were over technologized. Everybody thinks technology is wonderful, but I'm sure there's plenty of people watching who still can't turn on a VCR or DVD player, or, they're beyond using their cell phone.
Some of the more intelligent people I know, I have to tape the show for.
Well, are you looking at me?
No. Well, first of all, you're not on the same system. Actually, I'm more than... First of all, you should know that you and any other regular guest, I'm always happy to tape the show for. And as a matter of fact, I just realized we have a very important guest in the living room, who I'm glad I said that, because I have a tape with 2 shows for him that I would have forgotten otherwise. So that's Alderman Stone, of course, who is, no offense, he is my favorite guest. You're definitely second, maybe third.
Alderman Stone has earned his place at the top of the list. There's no question about that.
He's definitely at the top of every list as far as I'm concerned. I mean the good list, not the bad list. But in any event, anyway, so there were a lot. So of the 4,900 machines, there were a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the data at hand, but I personally observed there were 500 city precincts that the judges could not get the machinery working properly, that had to be counted for the first time down at the City of Chicago warehouse.
So you're talking about approximately 1/5 of all, 1 out of every 5 machines wasn't a countable machine.
Yeah, either the machine itself malfunctioned or the judges just weren't able to get it working due to, perhaps they didn't understand all the things they had to do to get it working. So, for about a week after the election, just about a week to the day, there were over 500 precincts where the ballots themselves had to be brought to the city warehouse, and then City of Chicago election board employees, along with a cadre of judges that they brought in, physically counted those ballots, which should have been counted election night at the precincts.
Now, was this random neighborhoods, or, I mean, in other words, was there a pattern, like, was this more on the south side, the north side,
It was pretty
the suburbs?
much all over. It was pretty much, so there was no area of the city that you could say everybody here got it right and all the machinery worked properly.
Because basically, when I was following the voting, the sun time at the election sites of both the county and the city, which I really wish there was one site that would combine the figures for both in a timely manner. It would make life a little easier, because I got a busy figure out math by math, each race,
Right.
given both of them together. But the fact is that when basically they stopped counting late Tuesday night rather, there was not a really appreciable change. I mean, I don't think anybody won or lost afterwards. I don't think anybody went up or down a lot. So it seemed like it was random as opposed to one neighborhood. I was thinking about they talked about the river wards in the Kennedy-Nixon days.
Well, yeah, I found it humorous because that night, that's where some of the television stations were going. When the vote totals weren't coming in, they suddenly were hearkening back to the 1950s and 1960s and saying, oh, there must be something sinister going on. It was nothing more sinister than technological breakdown and good old human error. So
Yeah.
I do believe that, once everything got counted and everybody understood how to get that done, there was an accurate count of the votes. It should have been done election night, and it took almost a week beyond that.
Well, hopefully, do you actually see this being? Do you see? So actually, probably it was. You think it was a combination of different things?
It was a combination of things. I really do think we were over technologized with this.
Yeah.
There's wonderful technology; it can do all sorts of amazing things, but you've got to make it user friendly.
Yeah.
And I think that what the election judges were asked to do, for instance, is after the OptiScan ballots were counted, where the voters fed in their ballot after they voted. Then there was this whole elaborate process where they were supposed to get the memory cards from the touch screens, bring those over, and there was a port on the OptiScan so they could merge the data off the touchscreen memory card. And, we're talking about people who aren't PhDs in computer science. We're talking about people who had a 3-hour training session. Many of our election judges are older folks who aren't that computer savvy anyhow.
You know what? When I heard what election judges were paid this year, I thought about, maybe I should do this next time. It's actually not bad money anymore.
Well, think about it, though. An election judge makes about $100 for the day, but it's a day that starts about 5 a.m., and this election...
Well, I don't know if you know, I actually was a Republican Project Leap election judge once.
Oh, were you?
And, yeah, and this is in the days, and by the way, speaking of, this was at that, it used to be a synagogue about 3100 on Toohey. And first of all, about 500 people voted there. Those were in the days when people actually voted. And there were paper ballots for judges. We left at about 5:20 in the morning, which is one of the main reasons why I never went back.
Well, you look at the OptiScan, and we went back to paper ballots with that, filling in the ovals.
Yeah,
so.
But that was paper ballots. It's funny because I still think back to the old days. The first time I ever voted was 1972. And the first candidate I ever voted for was still the best candidate I ever voted for.
Who was that?
Well, basically, I voted first in the primary for delegate to the Democratic Convention in 1972. And there was an individual named Avram S. Meyers who was running in the 9th District. And I voted for him, and it's been straight downhill ever since.
That was as good as it got, huh?
Yeah, what can I tell you? Now, I did vote for somebody named Nally once for county board, if I remember properly.
A long time ago.
Endorsed by the Tribune.
But,
which ain't easy for a Democrat.
No, it's true.
Quality candidates, what can I tell you?
But, this system, I think I do give the election authorities credit, particularly the Chicago board. Once the problem became apparent, they really did, put a lot of resources and a lot of time into trying to get it straightened out very quickly. But, keep in mind, too, the turnout was only about 33% in the city.
It was abysmal. It was unbelievable. I don't think it was the lowest it ever was.
It was about a third of the city, and in the county was maybe 24, 25%. So we had all these problems. We just can't let that happen in November because turnout's going to be substantially more than that come November in a general election. And if you have these same problems, it could be Christmas before we get all the votes in.
Yeah, that would be true. Well, hopefully, it sounds to me, the one thing that gives me confidence that they're going to do something about it is it was in the newspapers and everybody's really scared now.
Well, I'll tell you something, and I was a skeptic of the touchscreen voting because I not being as computer savvy as a lot of people, I was just curious whether there's ways that could be manipulated where even if you thought, for instance, you were touching a particular candidate to vote for them, that somehow or another it might not register with the computer. But what I saw in conducting the count, and I was also involved in a recount after the election, the touchscreens were almost 100% on the money.
Really?
And one of the good features that the local authorities here required that isn't required everywhere else throughout the country on the touchscreens is when you go in and vote on the touchscreen, it generates a paper receipt of your vote.
Yeah, I think that's so important because there needs to be some sort of record that way.
And
because you talked about manipulation, yeah.
Well, before, I mean, a skilled computer programmer could make sure that if you touched a vote for candidate A, it would actually register for candidate B.
Right.
So, but by having that tape there, the voter before they left the touchscreen polling booth could look at the tape and see a printout on that tape of who they voted for and verify then that, okay, all the people I wanted to vote for are on this tape. And when we went back during the recount and looked at the tapes and compared the tapes to the actual canvass results from that machine, they were almost 100% online.
That's really good. That's really impressive. I like that.
So, unfortunately, the reason the city and the county adopted this, the OptiScan and the touchscreen, is that at this point they can't afford to buy all touchscreens because those units go for about $2,500 or $3,000 a piece, and you would need in every precinct, roughly 4 or 5, maybe 6, depending on the size of the precinct. Whereas with the OptiScan,
of course, as few people as voted this time keeps going, but
well, that's true.
Well, hopefully it won't be that way, though.
I think November you're going to see a much stronger turnout.
I sure hope so.
And but
it's
a money thing.
Every man, woman, and child within not just Cook County but in the entire world needs to vote for Terry O'Brien come November.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Terry at this point, having triumphed in the primary, there are no Republicans running for that position.
No,
at
he'll
this
be
point.
fine. We've got about a minute left. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, that was kind of the big story. That's what I've been doing
Well,
for
that
the last
was a
several
big story,
weeks.
but you know what? Okay, no, that's a lot. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much. Well, actually, we've got. Okay, I want to thank you, Jim Nally. If people want to contact you at your office, they can call 312-422-5560. That I know.
Correct.
And in terms of the next election, so. Is there going to be any changes? Is the county going to do anything different in terms for the election?
I think they've already started to take some steps to, working with their vendor to make sure that some of these issues are addressed. And also I think part of what they're doing now is making sure that they're going to try to simplify the way the judges in the precinct operate in terms of what they need to do with the machine.
Well, now they've got some real experience, they can go at it. Are there any elections that are still being contested?
There's been discovery recounts. There's still a couple of school referenda that are out there that people are looking at that passed or failed by only a handful of votes. So there could be actually some election contests there.
At this point, we want to thank very much Jim Nally, and thanks Sonny, and